Walmart's shelves tell a story this month that most shoppers are walking past without noticing. 9 everyday grocery items are facing supply pressure serious enough that prices are already climbing, and some of them may not look the same on the shelf after July 1st. Number 1. Coffee. Coffee prices have been climbing for 2 consecutive years because the 2 countries that supply more than half the world's beans, Brazil and Vietnam, have both experienced severe drought and heat damage to major growing regions. The International Coffee Organization has documented multiple consecutive seasons of reduced yield projections, and roasters have already passed those costs through to retail shelves in the form of smaller bag sizes at the same price point, a practice called shrinkflation that disguises the real increase. Whole bean and ground coffee in vacuum-sealed cans stores for 1 to 2 years past the printed date without significant quality loss when kept in a cool, dry location, and freeze-dried instant coffee in a sealed container stores considerably longer than that. Buying 2 or 3 extra bags now at current pricing locks in today's cost before the next round of price adjustments works through the supply chain. And coffee is one of the few grocery items where the gap between current and projected future pricing makes stockpiling a meaningful financial decision. Several major coffee brands have already announced additional price increases scheduled for later this year in statements to industry trade publications, meaning the current shelf price represents the lower end of where pricing is headed. Number 2. Cocoa and chocolate. Cocoa and anything made primarily from chocolate has experienced the most dramatic commodity price increase of any food category in recent memory. Cocoa futures prices more than tripled between 2023 and 2024 because Ivory Coast and Ghana, which together grow the majority of the world's cocoa, suffered crop disease outbreaks and erratic weather that devastated harvests for consecutive seasons. Chocolate manufacturers have responded with smaller bar sizes, reformulated recipes using less actual cocoa content and more substitute ingredients, and direct price increases on baking chocolate and cocoa powder that have outpaced general grocery inflation by a significant margin. Baking chocolate, cocoa powder, and chocolate chips in sealed packaging store for 1 to 2 years in a cool pantry without meaningful quality loss. And the stocking up on baking staples now protects against both the price increases already underway and the recipe reformulations that quietly reduce the actual cocoa content at the same price point on the shelf today. Several major chocolate brands have publicly acknowledged reformulation efforts in earnings calls and trade press coverage, confirming that the cocoa percentage in many familiar products has been quietly reduced, even on items where the packaging and price have stayed visually unchanged on the shelf. Number 3. Olive oil. Olive oil has seen sustained price pressure because Spain, which produces nearly half the world's olive oil, experienced consecutive years of severe drought that cut harvest yields by as much as 50% in the worst seasons on record. Italy and Greece, the next largest producers, faced similar conditions in overlapping years, which meant the usual ability to compensate for one country's shortfall with another's surplus simply did not exist during this stretch. Olive oil prices at major retailers have roughly doubled from pre-drought levels in many regions, and bottles are increasingly being sold in smaller sizes at similar price points to soften the appearance of the increase. Olive oil stores for up to 2 years in a cool, dark location away from heat and light, and buying in the 1 liter or larger format when available, represents meaningfully better value per ounce than the smaller bottles that have become more common on shelves over the past 2 years. Multiple olive oil producing regions have reported that the drought conditions affecting yields are part of a longer-term pattern rather than an isolated bad year, which means producers themselves are not projecting near-term relief in either supply volume or pricing for the next several harvest cycles. Number 4. Orange juice. Orange juice has been quietly disappearing from store brand selections for over a decade because of citrus greening disease, a bacterial infection spread by an invasive insect that has devastated Florida's citrus groves more thoroughly than any single weather event ever could. Florida orange production has fallen by more than 70% from its peak according to USDA crop reports, and Florida historically supplied the majority of U.S. orange juice before this decline began. The result has been steadily climbing prices, smaller container sizes, and an increasing reliance on imported concentrate from Brazil and Mexico, which carries its own price volatility tied to weather and currency fluctuations in those countries. Shelf-stable boxed and canned juice concentrates, as opposed to refrigerated juice, store for 6 months to a year unopened and represent a practical way to lock in current pricing on a product whose domestic supply chain shows no signs of recovering within the foreseeable future. Citrus greening has no commercially available cure, and ongoing research into disease-resistant tree varieties remains years away from large-scale planting, which means the structural decline in Florida citrus production is one of the more permanent supply shifts on this entire list rather than a temporary weather event. Number 5, beef. Beef prices reflect one of the most significant agricultural shifts in decades. The U.S. cattle herd size has fallen to its smallest level since the early 1950s, according to USDA livestock reports, driven by years of drought across major cattle-raising states that made it more expensive to feed and maintain herds, leading many ranchers to reduce herd sizes permanently rather than temporarily as conditions improved. Rebuilding a cattle herd takes years because of the biological reality of cattle breeding cycles, where calves take roughly 2 years to reach market weight after birth, which means beef prices are unlikely to come down quickly, regardless of how demand shifts in the near term. Canned beef products, freeze-dried beef, and shelf-stable beef jerky represent ways to access beef protein at a locked-in price point, while fresh beef prices continue the upward trajectory that herd data suggests will persist for years rather than months going forward. Industry analysts tracking cattle futures markets have noted that herd rebuilding has not meaningfully begun even in years following drought relief, because ranchers who exited the business or downsized permanently have been slow to re-enter given the capital investment required to restart a breeding herd from a reduced base. Number 6, eggs. Eggs have experienced repeated price spikes over the past several years due to recurring outbreaks of highly pathogenic avian influenza, which has required the culling of tens of millions of egg-laying hens during multiple outbreak waves, documented by the USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. Each outbreak wave reduces the national laying flock and takes months to over a year to rebuild because replacement hens need time to mature before they begin laying productively at commercial scale. The unpredictable and recurring nature of these outbreaks means egg prices and availability can shift suddenly with very little advance warning to consumers or even to retailers managing their own inventory. Powdered whole egg products and freeze-dried egg products store for 5 to 10 years in sealed packaging and provide a meaningful hedge against both the price volatility and the periodic availability gaps that fresh eggs have experienced repeatedly over the past several years. Layer flocks in the hardest-hit regions have in some cases been reduced by double-digit percentages within a single outbreak season, and because laying hens are typically replaced on an 18-month cycle, even under normal conditions, any disruption to that cycle compounds across multiple seasons before flock sizes fully normalize again. Number 7, canned tuna. Canned tuna and other canned seafood have faced upward price pressure from a combination of global tuna stock management measures that limit catch sizes in major fishing regions and increased tariffs on imported seafood, since the majority of canned tuna sold in the United States is processed using fish caught internationally and packed either overseas or domestically from imported raw fish. Both factors increase the landed cost of the raw product before it ever reaches a can on a shelf. Canned tuna in water or oil has a shelf life of 3 to 5 years from the production date, making it one of the longest storing protein sources available at any grocery store. And current pricing represents a meaningful opportunity to stock a multi-year protein supply before the next round of tariff or catch limit adjustments works through to shelf prices over the coming months. Some canned tuna brands have already adjusted can sizes downward while maintaining shelf price, which is the same shrinkflation pattern seen in coffee, meaning the effective price increase per ounce is larger than the sticker price alone would suggest to a shopper doing a quick price comparison. Number 8, maple syrup. Maple syrup production has become increasingly unpredictable because the sugaring season, the narrow window of freezing nights and thawing days required for sap to flow properly, has been shifting and shortening due to warming winter temperatures documented by climate researchers studying the northeastern United States and Quebec, which together supply the overwhelming majority of the world's maple syrup. Shorter and less predictable sugaring seasons translate directly into lower yields and higher prices in years when the weather window closes earlier than producers can fully harvest. Pure maple syrup in glass or plastic containers stores for 1 to 2 years unopened in a pantry, and once opened it stores for up to a year in the refrigerator, which makes it practical to buy ahead during years when supply and pricing are favorable, rather than purchasing reactively during a poor production year that drives prices sharply upward. Vermont and Quebec producers have both reported in industry publications that the traditional sugaring season window has measurably narrowed over the past 2 decades, and producers who have not diversified into sap-based products beyond syrup have seen the most direct impact on total annual output and revenue. Number 9, honey. Honey has faced supply pressure from 2 directions simultaneously. Domestic honeybee colony losses have remained elevated for years, according to annual surveys conducted by the Bee Informed Partnership, with commercial beekeepers reporting colony loss rates well above historical norms, due to a combination of parasites, pesticide exposure, and habitat loss across major beekeeping regions. At the same time, tariffs and anti-dumping duties on imported honey, particularly from countries that have historically supplied lower-cost honey to the U.S. market, have reduced the availability of cheaper imported alternatives that previously kept domestic prices in check during shortfall years. Raw honey has an effectively indefinite shelf life when stored sealed and away from moisture, which means buying honey now at current pricing carries essentially zero downside risk, even if prices were to stabilize, while protecting against the upside risk that both supply pressures continue into next year. Commercial beekeeping operations that provide pollination services for major crops have reported that colony losses affect not just honey production directly, but also the availability and cost of pollination services for almond, berry, and other crops that depend on rented hives, creating a secondary cost pressure across the broader food system. Every supply pressure behind these 9 items is structural and documented by USDA and international agricultural data, not the kind of problem that resolves in a few weeks. Stocking up before July first locks in today's prices on items whose supply chains are not recovering anytime soon.